Okay, so good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world during these times, and welcome to the next Pacific Basin Economic Council webinar virtual series. And this morning we are going to be covering the topic of the future of supply chains, and this is the second episode on this particular topic that we've done in the autumn. There are a series of other related topics which you will find on our website and through our social media channels on LinkedIn, etc. So please do follow us or check out our website. It gets updated on a regular basis, and there's lots of great content from great speakers throughout this period, which we are in virtual mode still. And we're joined this morning by a distinguished, I would like to say, roundtable of panel speakers, kicking off with our guest moderator this morning, Anson Bailey, Head of Consumer and Retail, ASPAC, and Head of Technology, Media and Telecoms, Hong Kong at KPMG China. He also happens to be our PBEC Treasurer and on the board. We also welcome Minesh Pore, co-founder and CEO of the Buyhive. Thanks for joining us this morning. Also, Ben Simpfendorfer, co-founder and CEO of Silk Road Associates and SRA Intelligence, Hong Kong, who's also a fellow board member on PBEC. And then we have Ann-Laure Descours, Chief Sourcing Officer at Puma, member of the management board. Thank you so much, Anne, for joining us this morning. Gareth Brooks, Managing Director of VF Asia Sourcing Limited, a New York Stock Exchange listed company. And finally, but no means least, Raina Althoff, from Global Sustainability and Digitalization Expert and Independent Non-Executive Director of Top Glove Corporation, the second most valuable company now in Malaysia since this whole pandemic commenced. So without further ado, I'm going to be sharing my screen now and introducing or passing the floor to Ben just to set the scene, and then our guest moderator for today, Anson, will take us through the recent sourcing report that was released in Hong Kong, and then open it up for dialogue with a fellow panelists, including our friends down in Malaysia. So let me just switch screens now, and I will get this presentation up for you, Ben. So hopefully you can see my big screen, and I'm going to mute myself. And the floor is yours, Ben. Thank you so much. Ben, can you unmute yourself? Sorry.
Mike, if you could go back one slide, much appreciated.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Super. Forward one slide is fine.
There we go. Sorry. Over to you. Thanks.
Super. Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for the kind introduction. Delighted to be here. I thought to just make a few opening comments just to set the stage. My thoughts will be from a 30,000-foot level before we start to think about what's actually happening on the ground. With a fabulous lineup of panelists today. So the global supply chain faces a historic disruption. We are seeing change on a level that we haven't seen in decades, but we need to think about that change because it's far more complex than what you read about on media headlines. I guess the first point to make is that scale creates friction in the supply chain. China is by far the world's largest manufacturing hub, nearly 1.5 times larger than either the United States or Germany, nearly 5 times larger than any other top 20 export producer. And so when we talk about the relocation of factories, we're really talking about the relocation of factories from a very large manufacturing hub into what are often very small hubs scattered across the globe. And that's never an easy thing to take place. As part of my job or day job, we do a lot of work around supply chain analysis, but also industrial park development. What's always striking for me is that our geospatial analytics shows that China's Pore River Delta, neighboring Hong Kong, has as much developed industrial land as all Southeast Asia combined. And so that really just underscores the challenge, just how much work needs to be done in order to get ready, or to get Southeast Asia ready for the scale of potential factory relocation that will take place. It's really not an easy challenge. And even when you can develop the land, then there are challenges around finding the right type of labor. At the same time, the changes that are taking place are no longer just about cost, which was often the dominant theme over the last decade or more. There are actually three specific disruptors. The first of those will be well known to many, that's China Plus One. Cost is an element to this, but also it's a strategy that really tries to reduce your reliance on China as your sole sourcing destination. But more recently, US-China trade tensions have been a real driver of factory relocation as manufacturers, not just in the consumer goods industry, but also the industrial sector, worried about their exposure to tariffs when exporting to the United States. The clearest impact on the supply chain here, and the most striking impact, is the fact that it's driven production not just from China into cheaper locations, but from China into Taiwan. We've seen the Taiwanese producers of servers destined for Google or Facebook move production back into Taiwan in order to demonstrate to their buyers that their products have no made in China components in them. And that's quite a new feature of the supply chain. The third, though, is critical industries, and that's perhaps the most recent development, but partly as a result of COVID-19, as advanced countries in particular have realized their overwhelming dependence on China for certain key medical items, not least the protective gloves and gowns that are used in hospitals, but also the active pharmaceutical ingredients that go into most of our medical products. And so this is another trend whereby we're starting to see governments step up and be prepared to offer subsidies to bring some of that production back. But I raise these three factors just again to underscore that it's no longer just about cost. There are multiple layers of disruption taking place, and that means there's a lot of complexity involved. We need to look beyond media headlines. Next slide, please. And we are seeing an impact across industries. Much of today's conversation may be focused particularly on clothing and footwear. So I wanted to share a few quick thoughts on ICT and industrial sectors. China is clearly the dominant producer in the consumer goods sector, accounting for nearly half of global trade. But that share falls when you begin to look at ICT. Here, the global supply chain is heavily concentrated in North Asia in particular. But it falls again when you start to look at industrial goods, where China actually has a reasonably small share of global trade, and a large share of industrial good manufacturers are still located across most of the advanced economies in North Asia, Europe, and the United States. So again, whereas China Plus One tends to define what we're seeing in consumer goods, in the ICT sector, it's very much about techno-nationalism. In the industrial goods sector, it's a different story, one of around supply chain resiliency and the fact that many the world's big industrial goods manufacturers already have large amounts of capacity back in their home markets. And so where they do keep production in China, it's very much in China for China. So again, I thought just provide some 30,000 foot numbers here, try and frame today's conversation, again, to underscore the fact that there are complexities, there are multiple drivers of change in the global supply chain, but equally we're seeing very different patterns across different sectors. So perhaps if I leave my remarks there, Mike, and turn it over to Anson.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. And Anson, would you like to take the floor, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Appreciate the intros there, Michael. And Ben, as always, great to have you joining us and really helping us, I think, to set the scene. As you rightly pointed out, we are going to see this new type of global trade emerging. And what I'd like to do right now, ladies and gentlemen, is really just take you through the findings of the report that we have literally just launched a couple of weeks ago on the future of sourcing. And I will try and get through this very, very quickly for you. But I do think it's worthwhile us just spending some time looking at the key messages, because we were asked, in fact, we were commissioned by Invest Hong Kong to look at, of course, whether Hong Kong would continue to be relevant. As we all know, there's a lot of stories in media and global media about the demise of manufacturing in China, and also the demise of Hong Kong as a sourcing hub as well. So what we wanted to do is just to spend a few minutes now running through what were the key findings. And I think it's fair to say that COVID-19 has impacted everyone. It's certainly had a very significant impact on the entire supply chain, and that's for some time to come as well. I think also companies now realize that there is a need to digitize across those supply chains as well. And of course, there is that question in terms of where is the next Hong Kong? Well, simply stated, I don't think we are going to see another Hong Kong emerge in this new era of digitization. And equally, we heard from a lot of senior execs the need to leverage a lot of those new digital technologies. But something that I think we also heard from across the industry is that we all need to do a better job on talent development. And we've got to upskill our people, which is going to be critical for the further survival for all of our businesses. Equally, we did hear that perhaps we are going to see this transformation. We're going to see, for example, Hong Kong transforming into this global digital supply chain services hub. And of course, there is I think, a high concentration of sourcing talent that can be found here in Hong Kong. Again, Hong Kong is a regional hub for a lot of the different players. And of course, it has its strengths in trading for many decades, of course, in its financial and legal and commercial structures. The interesting thing, and perhaps this is something that we can discuss with the panel a little bit later on, is the clustering effect of cities. Because I think if you take Hong Kong by itself, yes, there are a few question marks. But if you build Hong Kong and put it together with the likes of Shenzhen and Guangzhou, suddenly you have a very powerful clustering effect. The other issue that we, of course, heard from a lot of senior executives is Hong Kong still has a very international business mindset. A lot of the people there. But also equally, the other key message would be the rise of ESG reporting and everything around sustainability. We've been hearing about CSR for a number of years, sustainability for a number of years, but I think 2020, I think perhaps COVID-19 is really being the catalyst to make us understand that we've all got to do a better job for our environment. Equally, the other thing I was going to say for all of us is we are seeing this changing consumer expectations emerge around both the origin and the manner of production. A lot of those consumers now are watching all of you. They're watching all the big brands and the retailers. Are you walking the talk? And of course, those new technologies are emerging as well. I don't need to say, of course, places like Hong Kong continue to be a resilient place. We've seen a number of black swans that have emerged. And yet, Hong Kong is still here. But also, I think more importantly, as I said, I think Hong Kong's going to act as this super connector to the GBA in the future. And I think it's also fair to say that we look at free trade agreements between the likes of Hong Kong and ASEAN. Now, what's interesting, and I'm sure Ben's got a view on this, is that Vietnam, out of all the countries across the region, Vietnam have been the most prolific on signing those free trade agreements around the region as well. And of course, a couple of weeks ago, we saw the signing of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, Rcep, signed on the 15th of November. And well, what's that all about? You can see those 10 ASEAN nations came together to sign this agreement with China, Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. Now, this is probably the biggest free trade agreement ever in terms of the creation of this new free trade zone. It's actually the first time that China and Japan have signed this type of trade agreement. I think equally, Ben, maybe you can correct me, I think Japan and Korea, this is the first time that they've signed such an agreement. I think what's interesting is right now it represents 29% of the global GDP, but that's going to rise to nearly 50% by 2030. So in the next decade, that is a very significant number indeed. And again, what, why am I excited about it? I think we are going to see this harmonization of those supply chains, given all the complexities of trade within this region. And I think we can also expect to eliminate a range of those tariffs as well. And of course, we've also going to see the rise of the likes of e-commerce, and we'll come back to that a little bit later on. So again, I think this is where it gets interesting for me. Geographically, and certainly on the infrastructure side, Hong Kong, is going to act as this gateway to ASEAN for both Chinese and multinational companies as well. And of course, the interesting thing is that the transportation hub that plays in Hong Kong's favor as well. And equally, Hong Kong is going to still be at the heart of end-to-end supply chains. We saw from the WTO statistical review for 2020, Hong Kong actually moved up 4 places. But as we said, we are seeing this shift from China. And I'm sure that all of our senior executives today will be able to share their stories with all of us about how they are diversifying without a shadow of a doubt. This is happening right now. And of course, places like Vietnam, I would say, are the big benefactors to this shift away from China. Equally, we are dealing with perhaps more complex supply chains. And certainly I've been talking to a number of major manufacturers and other big brands that are now looking at, well, instead of sending products directly from China, do we, perhaps move manufacturing to ASEAN and South Asia? And I think Ben picked up on a very good point a little bit earlier on around the ICT goods, because this is textile and apparel. But on the ICT, we are seeing this techno nationalism emerge as well. I'm sure we also get asked a lot about, well, Vietnam, is that going to be the next China? I think, of course, Vietnam has been the big benefactor, but it's not the next China. It is a growing base for those multinationals, but there are still bottlenecks that we see across Vietnam as well. Now, Ben, this is one of your graphs. I always love all the cool stuff that you're doing at Silk Road Associates. And as you mentioned as well, we are seeing that movement across a number of different categories. And of course, I think you rightly pointed out that computers and related items, we are seeing other markets, including Taiwan, that are, certainly drive some of that growth. But look at Vietnam on this chart. You can see they are certainly benefiting around the region. And this is also interesting because we've been looking at mainland China, been looking at all those exports certainly over the years. And what I'd say to everybody is, mainland China continues to be the 300-pound gorilla in the region. However, it's perhaps not the 300-pound gorilla anymore. Maybe it's more like the 250-pound gorilla. So we are seeing production that is moving around. Equally, when we look at the import of finished apparel, these are some of the projections. We do see, of course, that places like Vietnam and Bangladesh show the highest growth in production. And I'm sure that both Gareth from VF as well as Ann-Laure from Puma can also share their thoughts with us about the markets that they really see driving a us forward. And as I mentioned, when we spoke to a lot of those senior executives, a lot of people were talking about Vietnam, but equally, people were also talking about India and Indonesia and, of course, Bangladesh. And I think Ann-Laure, if I'm not mistaken, one of the comments she said to me is that she is a Bangladeshi girl. Big fan of that market. And of course, we have got Malaysia and Thailand and Cambodia, and we've got some of the other emerging markets as well. Just with regards to the report, Mike, we spoke to a lot of senior executives, including the likes of Christophe Roussel at Gap, Ann-Laure at Puma, Gareth at VF. But we did speak to a really good cross-section of industry to get their views. Again, you can see I'm putting words into Ann-Laure's mouth here, but the quote was, when it comes to overseeing the supply chains, Hong Kong is still the best option, with the flexibility and adaptability of Hong Kong people being the key to the city's efficiency and entrepreneurial talent. And equally, Gareth talked about how Hong Kong is still an important hub, and again, thanks to its financial hub status as well. And then equally, we spoke to people like Mark Slade at DHL Global Forwarding, and he was also saying that as a global air gateway, Hong Kong will continue to be the leader for the foreseeable future. I pressed him on the length of time. He was very bullish and said within the next decade. But again, time is going to tell. So what is driving the change? Production, logistics costs, those trade agreements, that's going to drive change. The process automation, sustainability, and of course, quality at scale. These are all key drivers. Now, I just wanted to very quickly mention this interesting point about we are seeing a growing diverse ecosystem. When I say diverse ecosystem, I'm talking about the startups, because there's some really interesting startups that are emerging. And, people like Minesh Pore, the CEO and co-founder of Buyhive, they're one of the startups that we see emerging right now. And I'm sure during the Q&A session, we are going to come to questions around how we see that happening. But I think it's also fair to say that tech and innovation are really key players for the future. And of course, for all of the sourcing, the manufacturing and sourcing industries, that's going to be really important. Now, the interesting thing, of course, is the Hong Kong government have actually been funding the development of everything around innovation and technology for quite a long time. And we see the emergence of the likes of the Hong Kong Science and Technology Park. We see the likes of Cyberport as well. And as I go back to my earlier point about the clustering effect, this is quite interesting, because this is from the Global Innovation Index for 2020, where if you put Hong Kong together with Shenzhen and Guangzhou, suddenly it's ranked number 2 globally, whereas of course Silicon Valley is ranked number 5. Now again, there are a number of different reports, but it is really looking at the future of science and innovation and technology. You also note that Tokyo, Yokohama is ranked number 1, and again, I think that is something that Ben pointed to in terms of industrial goods, the emergence of all of that tech and innovation, for example, in industrial goods. As I said, this is where it gets, I think, quite interesting, because in places like Hong Kong, you've also got Cyberport, you've got the Hong Kong Science and Technology Park. And on Friday, last Friday, I was over in Zhongguanou, which is the big industrial park in Hong Kong, where they are building this new advanced manufacturing center, AMC. And again, I think that's a great example, whereas, later in 2021, you are going to have a world-class state-of-the-art manufacturing center also emerge here in Hong Kong. So, again, back to the future, we do see those interesting developments, but it's all around tech and innovation. The other thing I just wanted to mention as well before we go into our Q&A is we're also seeing some buildings and some companies that are repurposing themselves. They're looking to drive innovation. This is the Mills Fabrica. This is an old textile mill over in Chin Wan in Hong Kong. But the interesting thing is that they're really developing this retail space with these startups. So you've got these new, retail related startups that are showing off the technology. They're also an accelerator where they're nurturing and developing these fashion related startups. And they're also looking at investing in the future startups. And this again is really interesting because we are seeing now a lot more innovation across the entire supply chain, whether it's, looking at the material developments, digitized production, whether it's looking at, of course, the likes of ESG reporting and sustainability as well. So that's exciting because we are now seeing a lot of these places really open their doors to the future startup communities and a growing number of startups. Just a couple of final remarks around ESG. I think this is where it's going to get interesting because suddenly people are genuinely doing stuff and they are actioning on that ESG reporting. Big focus now from investor groups. There's equally the regulators that are coming on board. There are the banks that are now demanding that you do more and more if you want to get those preferential loans. And the consumers, they are watching you across your entire supply chain. And this is interesting because, of course, even the likes of the Hong Kong regulators now are driving these ESG initiatives. Now, I've talked about manufacturing and sourcing. I also just want to let everybody know that consumers, I always think there's a bit of a disconnect between what we do, at the manufacturing side of things and take it to the end-to-end supply chain. And, are we really connecting with all of those consumers? And COVID-19 has changed everything. It's certainly changed the behaviors of those consumers as well. And we've been doing a lot of research in the last several months, 75,000 global consumers, including consumers here in Asia, across China, and elsewhere. But the key message, of course, as we know, there's been a big economic impact, but the rise of digital is here and it is here to stay. We're not going to see things change. Equally, we've seen an erosion of trust in those brands over the last few months of COVID-19. And of course, perhaps not as a big surprise, but home is now the new hub. And we've also got those shopping festivals that that continue to gain momentum. I don't need to tell everybody about Alibaba, but actually it should be $74.1 billion in sales for 2020. Black Friday, Cyber Monday, 10.8 billion. So those online festivals are going to continue to flourish. Those consumers are not going to go back to the old ways. Now, what was interesting is we were looking at the various brands on Singles Day. I think there were around 15 brands that did $1 billion. But I had an opportunity to talk to the COO, head of supply chain at L'Oreal, Antoine, a couple of weeks ago at the French Chamber Made in Asia virtual conference, and he said now in China, over 50% of their sales were online. Now, I remember, going back a couple of years, we were talking about perhaps we're going to see 10% of sales online. maybe even 20% of sales online. But there we have the news from L'Oreal that they're already at 50% of sales online in China. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm going to open this up to our distinguished panel members, and I'm really looking forward to getting their viewpoints as well. But we are seeing these emerging technologies like AI, blockchain, 3D, virtual sampling, AR and VR. That's going to impact all of us. It's certainly going to impact those global supply chains, along with, of course, the likes of automation. Innovation, that's going to be critical, but we have to upskill our people. That was a clear message. The rise of purpose, we're going to see that. ESG, sustainability is non-negotiable in the future. And we actually see that, Hong Kong should be well placed to be a center of those professional services. We're also seeing a shifting focus to ASEAN and Chinese consumers. Now, again, it's going to be interesting to get the views from the panel, but we do see the coming of age of those Chinese consumers and equally of those ASEAN consumers, and they've really adopted a lot of the technologies. They're very digitally minded and tech savvy today. And then finally, get ready for increased transparency. We are going to have to really study those changing consumer behaviors. We're also going to have to understand who those consumers are. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all for letting me share those findings with all of you. We are now going to go into our panel discussions. And obviously, I am very much looking forward to getting the views of all of our senior executives. Now, obviously, you've heard from me, but I think it's only fair to have short introductions from each of our speakers, if you don't mind. I'm going to start with ladies first. So Ann-Laure, the Chief Sourcing Officer with Puma. Ann, do you want to just spend a very quick elevator pitch to tell us a little bit about yourself and, of course, the company you represent?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Good, okay. Well, I've been in the region for more than 25 years, and with Puma for the last 8 years. At Puma, I look after the entire supply chain and operations and sustainability based in Hong Kong. I haven't been in Germany for quite some time now due to COVID, but I'm sitting at the board. So thank goodness through technology, we can still talk to each other. Prior to Puma, I was working for Li & Fung for many, many years. So very different supply chain from a trading company to a brand, but very complementary.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ann-Laure, and great to have you here this morning with us. Gareth Brooks, VF. Quick intro, my friend.
Sure. So my name's Gareth Brooks. I'm the Managing Director of VF Asia Sourcing Limited. We're part of the product supply organization for VF Corporation, supplying about 80% of all of the products VF sells globally. Most people haven't heard of VF, but you'll be familiar with the brands that we own. So Timberland, the North Face, Vans, Dickie, Eastpak, Eagle Creek, JanSport, and a whole bunch of others. We've got about 1,200 associates spread across the region and sourcing from Korea all the way through to Kenya and everywhere in between.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gareth. And your latest acquisition was Supreme.
It was. Yeah, we're very excited to welcome them to the family.
Absolutely. And again, just in case I haven't told you before, I have a teenage son. And one of his favorite brands, of course, is Vans. And he collects shoes at a very rapid pace. So we'll obviously be talking about those discounts later on, my friend. But great.
I'm sure he'll love Supreme as well, Anson. So
Yeah, that's what I'm concerned about, Gareth. That's what I'm very concerned about. But great to have you here. And I think it is interesting, Gareth, because people say VF, but of course, when you talk about the stable of brands that you have, it is quite amazing to think about all of those different brands that you are producing for. So thanks, and great to have you here. If I can move over to Rainer, and Rainer, good morning. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Anson. Thank you very much for the short intro. I will start with my own history.
Please.
Today, I consider myself as a sound digitalization expert. Why? I have a history in Siemens for 40 years, 3 different backgrounds: IT, automation, and connectivity from 1G to 6G. So that means these 3 lines of technology converged into the new stream of digitization. Digitization is technology, as you know, and digitalization is to turn this all into a sound, profitable business model. So I'm very happy to be a part of the digitalization party. And nowadays on board of Top Glove, and a company which is in rubber business, but you on your slide, change of global export market share, you focused in terms of rubber on China and electronic in terms of Malaysia. Electronic, my history in Malaysia is I invested into electronic manufacturing in Malaysia, 5.4 billion US, Osram in Finland, and so on. And rubber is not China, it's Malaysia actually. So you may review your slide from about the change of global export market. So what I like you to say in the beginning, COVID-19 is a catalyst to do a better job in the future. That is exactly what it is, because we are running now, or we ran through the 4th industrial revolution, which was not realized by many people in the world, because you cannot feel it, you cannot see it, you cannot touch it. So it's there. So the 4th industrial revolution was not recognized in most of the countries, even by intelligent people, not realized. Now COVID-19 popped it up, and now everybody goes online. Why? Because the digitized technologies help to do business on online basis. So that is in the future very much important, that this awareness exercise of COVID-19 happened and helps us to go into the next phase of the recently started 5th industrial revolution, which is data-driven, in my opinion. So on the other side, I see that the whole picture, more holistically, what will happen in the future. Top Glove was a manufacturer of gloves locally next to the rubber tree. In the future, it will happen that we go more into 200 countries worldwide. So now, if you see this as a use case of a manufacturer for consumer goods, I will change as a man who runs a digitalization project inside the company to turn a global manufacturer into a global CX manager. CX stands for customer experience. So our main focus is not the manufacturing capability anymore, but the customer experience. The better the experience of our customers worldwide is in more than 200 countries, the more business will happen. So it means a new type of branding will come in and many more things we need to change. And change is actually the modality. We need to hammer into the minds of the people, and we need to make use of many more skilled labor force. I think that's the worst thing we can address today, because we have no solutions. The skilled labor force is not where we want to do business. And when we do business, we don't have the skilled labor force. That is a contradiction in perfection, which has to be resolved during the next 1 or 2 or 3 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rainer. And again, just really appreciate, some of those great points. COVID-19 absolutely is a catalyst. And I love the fact that you talked about Top Glove moving from being that manufacturer to becoming a global customer experience manager. So you picked up on all of those good things. I will certainly go back and look at those charts and graphs again, Rainer. One slight area or one point here I'm going to deflect, because that particular graph that you talked about was from my good friend Ben Simpfendorfer at Silk Road Associates. That's my deflection. Ben, I'm just going to involve you. I'm going to bring you in as well if you want to just do a very quick intro and talk a little bit about yourself, but also all the cool things that you're doing at Silk Road Associates.
Thanks, Anson. So I run a consultancy here in Hong Kong. We are a data-driven consultancy, but we use a lot of geospatial analytics. That's analytics using satellite imaging and alternative data sets to map out not just the supply chain, but anything with a location. So what's very interesting to us is the movement of products across the region, both between countries, but also between warehouses and consumers. So that's a good deal of our focus. And I guess what makes it so exciting at this current time is that we are seeing so much disruption, whether because of the global supply chain and movements there, but also e-commerce. My background here is in Asia, where I've lived now for 20 years, and known Anson for perhaps nearly that same amount of time. So it's always a pleasure to be sharing a screen with you, Anson. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ben. And again, always great to get your perspective from Silk Road Associates and all the cool stuff that you're seeing. And as you said, we are seeing so much disruption today, but of course we've now got to deal with the rise of e-commerce as well. Now, talking about disruption, talking about digitization, last but not least, I'd like to welcome my good friend Minesh Pore, the CEO and co-founder of Buyhive. And, you know, they are one of those cool startups that we see emerging as well. So Minesh, perhaps a quick intro by you.
Thank you, Anson, and nice to meet everybody. So my background has been in the sourcing industry for the last 20-something years. I've been on the platform side, I've been on production side, and also on the compliance side. So in my past jobs, I was at Global Sources in Hong Kong, in China. I was at Intertech in US and Europe, managing North America, Latin America business, as well as Europe operations for the compliance business. And last year, along with the ex-CEO of Global Sources, we decided to solve some of the problems of the industry that Mr. Rainer was talking about. And one of the issues that we are solving, and I talk about it later, was related to transparency and user experience in the B2B trade, and also solving the issue of available skilled labor for sourcing. So those are two issues that we are tackling using technology in our startup, and we'll talk about it later. Thank you, Anson.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Really appreciate the intro there as well, Minesh. And I'm going to come back to you because obviously I do want to ask you a few questions, but I've got a whole bunch of questions, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm just going to I'm going to rapid fire those questions out to our distinguished panel members as well. Gareth, just very quickly, how do you plan for the unplannable? We've obviously seen earlier this year when COVID-19 really started to hit back, all those months ago, it's hard to imagine that it was Chinese New Year. It was the end of January, and we have been in this state of flux ever since. But we hear a lot about business continuity planning, disaster response. But things got really bad. I think it's safe to say that things got really bad in Q1. How have you dealt with all of this?
Yeah, so we were somewhat lucky. We had business continuity plans in place. We've had them in place for a number of years, and I'm pleased to say that they worked really well for us. As we went through the early stages of the pandemic, we adopted very much a people first, safety first approach. So, all associates across VF effectively working from home, and our business continuity plan helped there. One of the things that we hadn't considered though in our business continuity planning was what happens if no associates can go and visit any factories at all. And so that was something that we had to solve for on the fly. Now, fortunately, as Rainer mentioned, we live in a much more digital world now. And so, having tools like Zoom available to us has meant that we can do digital fitting with product teams in the US over Zoom. We're doing virtual inline and end of line inspection, also using Zoom. And so it's sort of figuring stuff out on the fly. I think the other big learning for us through this is particularly when the chaos first hit and we needed to try and understand what's the impact of Europe and the US closing, was just the huge volume of data. At any one time, we've got about 300,000 open purchase orders on our system. So trying to work out where are they, what status is that in, how do we then match that against a very rapidly changing demand signal from the brands, was tough. And those are the areas that we're looking to strengthen as we go forward, our ability to handle and process very large volumes of data like that.
Thanks, Gareth. Must have been a huge headache. But as you said, I mean, that's the interesting thing, isn't it? In the fact that technology and digitization is here now, and it's moved a long way. Talking about Zoom, and we're on the Zoom call this morning, but I think at the end of last year in December, there were 10 million active users. If we fast forward to the last couple of months, it's gone from 10 million to 300 million active users. So that does tell you that this move to digital is very much real. Thanks very much, Gareth. Ann-Laure, I wanted to kind of get your views as well, because we have been hearing about developing strategic supplier partnerships. Is that really happening? Because of course, right now it's been very, very tough, and maybe companies are just trying to survive. Can we really develop true partnerships?
Well, if you are in a survival mode, probably difficult. If you're not in a survival mode, definitely needed, and definitely not just needed, but being the key for surviving the next few years. Just to share a little bit of the experience we have had on this COVID-19 crisis. We have a very integrated supply chains. We have 25 key partners around the world, mostly in Asia, from footwear, apparel, and accessory, supplying 80% of Puma business. And this integration with the suppliers has helped us tremendously. But the one thing we did, as people probably know, Puma is a wholesale organization. 75% of what we produce is being distributed by partners. So it's not just us distributing, it's our partners. Basically, we are a suppliers to the Costco of this world, the JD of this world, the Taobao of this world. So, the one thing we did extremely early in the crisis was to talk to our partners to make sure they will not cancel. Because the moment you start canceling orders, you destroy the supply chain. And it can be a very short-term gain financially, but it's going to be a very long-term pain, because once you have closed down the factories because they have nothing to produce, to restart the factory takes you forever. And when you have built, this very integrated partnership, for us, it was about making sure they will always have something to produce, so they don't have to lay off workers, making sure the production line will not stop, because restarting a production line costs a lot of money, not even mentioning all the process you put in place behind it. And so at the very beginning of the crisis, starting Q2, when Europe and US shut down, the most of the conversation we have had was talking to our partners, the distributors, to make sure they will not cancel. I will not say who has canceled, who has not canceled, but you have here exactly the same attitude. Some are more partners in the way they work with Puma, and some are less. But at the end of the day, the fact that we cancel less than 1% of orders, less than 1%, and that was not even produced, and we paid for whatever we had to pay. So less than 1% globally is actually nothing. And the fact is, when the situation restarted, when Europe and US started to open up, then the suppliers ourselves were more than ready to take every opportunity to accelerate, because we could see the consumer wanted to buy. But because a lot of cancellation happened earlier, a lot of the distributor had nothing to sell. And so if your supply chain has been really kept very close and you haven't closed yourself, then when things reopen, you can really accelerate. And for us, keeping this strategy to be very integrated, very open, having daily conversation with the suppliers, daily conversation with the distributors to really make sure and convince them not to cancel has helped us tremendously. So we have seen COVID-19 has really demonstrated the work we've been doing for the past 10 years to consolidate, integrate, share, and build the same value between us and the vendors has had a really beneficial impact when things started to reopen.
Good point.
But it's not just us with the suppliers. That's why I want to really highlight it. It's us with the suppliers and us with the distributors. It was a complete supply chain from sellers into producers, really holding hands together. Because once you break the supply chain, in footwear particularly, how do you restart? It takes you forever and takes you a lot of money. So, keeping hands together and partnership together is actually critical.
Good point. Very good point. Once you break that supply chain, that is a huge headache. And good point about how you need to consolidate as well as integrate as well. Thank you, Ann-Laure. Rainer, I wanted to kind of get your perspective as well as a manufacturer. I think you mentioned to me earlier on that you're going to produce about 90 billion gloves this year. So what have been some of the challenges for you as a manufacturer?
Yes, thank you for the question. Many challenges appeared. We were not well prepared for this kind of COVID-19 effect, the most positive way, because who knew about the demand, the increase of demand of gloves as an essential product for the rest of the world, hospitals, doctors, frontliners. So this explosion of demand was captured by our manufacturing plants. So we improved a lot of and upgraded and built up new manufacturing plants as fast as we could. On the other hand, the supply chain is now becoming more and more bottleneck, because as you mentioned earlier, I now see a bit more clarity why we are now blocked with why so many roadblocks on the supply chain exist, because there are many more high value goods. Nationalism is inside, because of course, on the one hand side, there's a trade war between US and China, but on the other hand, China need to deliver, otherwise they cannot do business anymore. All this is stuck now in a situation where normally the full capacity of passenger flights can cope with extra loads of to be exported goods, but those passengers flights are not available anymore. So it means the whole world is now on delay in terms of deliveries, because the demand is on vessels. So I had a round talk yesterday and the day before with port managers. One of the most prominent ports here is the Port Tanjung Palapas in the south of Malaysia. They did about 979 million tons of TEUs this year already. That's a special record. But they are a transfer hub. So they see what sails from A to B along the routes. And the sailing of containers is going through, because all empty containers from elsewhere in the world going to China, instead of landing here at the final destination, at their final destination in Malaysia. So we are lacking capacities in terms of containers. We are lacking capacities of empty vessels. So we can produce like crazy, but we can't deliver. So our customers in the United States, which represent about 25% of our revenue stream, are not happy with us. So now the question, indirectly, you asked me, how will be the solution? In the long term, this system does not work anymore. The idea is basically driven by technology, of course, to produce where the customers are. To produce where the customers are and the talents are. I give you a very prominent example. I like Elon Musk. Please spend with me 1 more minute, but there's a very prominent example which helps us to understand the whole global perspective. This Elon Musk is producing e-cars, the best fully electric cars in the world. He started his first gigafactory in California. Then he set up the most advanced manufacturing plant for car making in China next to Shanghai, and a battery factory as well. And now he's setting up a factory close to Berlin. Why close to Berlin? Because not of cheap land. And of course, Europe is the 3rd largest car market. Remember, US is number 1, China is number 1 car market, US number 2, and Europe number 3. So in all these 3 hotspot markets, he produces e-cars. But where? Not where the traditional car makers are. Like in Germany, they are in the south, Munich and Stuttgart. He goes where the talents are. So the biggest talent, high techno talent area in the whole of Europe, maybe Europe and especially in Germany, are close to Berlin. So he taps all the talents from Berlin. So what does he mean? After the groundbreaking ceremony about a few months ago, he's not even ready to show a certificate of permission to start this manufacturing plant. He already grabbed all the talents from the mainland of Europe and especially Berlin. So that means in the future, we need to change our paradigm close to the customers, but even closer where the talents are. The rest is about supply chain. The supply chain is shorter because we don't throw products from here in Malaysia. We produce gloves from 3 grams per glove and throw them over the ocean around the half of the globe to the United States. Is that the wisest way of doing business in the future? Certainly no. Thank you. Hello? I cannot hear you.
Anson, you're on mute.
It's on your mute.
Sorry. That's the quote of the year. You're on mute. But I agree very much with you, Rainer, in the fact Tesla is a great example where people like Elon Musk, he goes where the talent is. And I'm going to ask a couple of questions around talent a little bit later on as well. So thank you for your sharing. And a key message from you is we need to produce where the customers are and where the talent is. I made a note of that. Thank you. Ben, just want to also get your views. Diversification, we've been hearing a lot about that. And obviously, as we know, companies have been diversifying not just because of the US-China trade tensions right now, but this has been going on for several years. So, who are the winners and the losers in your view?
So when you look at the trade data over the last sort of 12 months, 2019, there really are only 2 key winners, and that's Vietnam and Mexico. So production has moved, but it's primarily gone into 2 countries. So Vietnam picked up significant amounts of production in the phone sector, in the clothing sector. Mexico primarily in computers and in machinery tools. You saw very limited movement into other Southeast Asian countries. And that's not inconsistent with the trend that we've seen over the last 5 years. Vietnam has by far and large has really captured most of the shift to manufacturing into Southeast Asia. And there are a few challenges around that, though, of course. Certainly, PBEC, we ran a session in Ho Chi Minh, I think perhaps some 12 months ago now. But I think one of the key points that came out of that session is there just isn't enough spare capacity. There isn't the land, there isn't the labor. And while there is some significant industrial park construction taking place, it's not been easy to find locators or factories to fill those parks, especially when you begin to see big industrial firms look to move out. because they're very demanding in terms of talent, particularly around engineers and so forth. So capacity is beginning to fill up there. Thailand is a hotspot at the moment. There is a lot of industrial park developing taking place. It's perhaps the one country in the region where there really is some joined up thinking around master planning. The government is very committed to developing more an industry 4 type model, but also building out infrastructure, whether that's road or rail or expansion of ports, seaports, airports. A lot of interest, of course, in Indonesia, and there has been some really interesting activity east of Jakarta around Cikarang and similar places, particularly with some big Japanese investment into new seaports there, which may ease some of the bottlenecks. But this is all very, this is quite a long-term development. And again, the type of capacity we're talking about, it's still only a percentage or a share of existing capacity in just southern China. So there are going to be limits there. And I think what really strikes me over the last 12 months is the fact that, you know, over the last 10 years, when we talk about relocation, it's primarily been clothing and footwear sectors, where all of a sudden, I've had a chance to speak with a range of executives across big industrial companies. And in the past, they never talked about relocating. And all of a sudden, they're beginning to say, we need some reserve capacity, whether it's supply chain resilience or tariff avoidance, whatever it may be. But as they begin to move into Southeast Asia, then the bottlenecks are going to increase, competition will increase, whether it's for land or labor. So it won't be as easy as we think. But over a 10-year story, yeah, absolutely, Southeast Asia becomes more interesting, and we'll see, you know, Indonesia, we'll see Thailand and other countries begin to pick up some relocators.
Thanks, Ben. And again, really interesting to hear that note, because as you said, in the last 10 years, mainly around apparel and footwear, but of course now we're starting to see those, you know, industrial goods and industrial manufacturers as well look at potentially shifting production, but that doesn't make things any easier. As you said, those bottlenecks will be occurring. Minesh, I just wanted to kind of get your views here, because of course you are this brand new digital startup. You are, developing this digital platform. So what makes you believe that you're going to make a big difference? Are you going to make a big difference?
So, Anson, one of the things over the years that we struggled with, especially being from the background of the platforms like Global Sources and Alibaba, etc., was that there is a lack of transparency and trust in these platforms. And these platforms are good for matchmaking and connecting. The things they don't do is they don't give you the skill sets of sourcing, and they don't take accountability of making the trade happen. So in current example, and to what has happened with Top Glove and many other glove makers in the world, and Mr. Rayner will probably connect to that, is that there's been a ton of fake product all over the place because of the COVID demand being so high. And because of those fake products being so high, people have been scammed, people have been getting in trouble. And I think in the post-COVID world, where as one part of the market wants to move to sourcing digitally, another part of it is going to drag it out. So for us, the mission is to create digital tools that will allow for transparency and trust. And we think that with the APIs that are available today, especially, for example, we partnered up with Dun & Bradstreet to do financial due diligence, and their API connects with our API. We are connected, we're doing similar stuff with BSI and Intertech, where we'll be able to provide factory information and factory data just by connecting APIs. And the future is going to be around that. And the second part of the solutions that we are working on, or what we want to achieve, is to your point where you're talking about availability of skilled labor. As we all know, whether it is apparel or footwear or industrial goods, as sourcing moves to new markets, it's not going to be that easy to find sourcing professionals with experience in those markets. But with providing freelance sourcing professionals who have expertise in that category. For example, if you're looking for footwear sourcing in Vietnam, but you don't have sourcing professionals, you can come to a platform like ours, hire those people with the experience that you need, and they will do the work for you without you having to add a headcount and increase your costs when you're still not sure of how to go about it. So those are the things we are trying to solve. And I think that the COVID actually is a boon in disguise for us, where we will be able to, we have been able to build these solutions, and we are able to provide more transparency and skill sets.
Okay, good point. And that also begs the question as well. And Ann-Laure, I'm going to bring you in here in terms of, Minesh has just been talking about some of the fake products that have appeared in the marketplace. Transparency is certainly something that we are hearing about. So just how important is more transparency going to be across those supply chains, Ann-Laure?
Well, to me, it's going to be very simple. Either you can be transparent and you can survive, or you're going to disappear. I mean, between the regulators, between the investors, between the consumers, everybody is asking for transparency. The challenge, going back to the Thailand conversation, in the manufacturing landscape is how do you bring that transparency capability in your manufacturing base? It's going to go through education, through technology for sure, but a lot of education. When you have a manufacturer in Bangladesh, how do you educate HR people in Bangladesh to take care of the workers? How do you educate people to take care of waste? So this transparency connected to sustainability, which is, has emerged even bigger because of COVID-19, particularly in Europe and likely in the US, probably less in Asia right now, but in Europe, it's everywhere around the conversation. The people are talking about less consumption. There was the Black Friday in last week, and in France, some of the distributors refused to do Black Friday because it's encouraging use less consumption that's going to turn it into waste. So this whole topic around sustainability, transparency is absolutely central to the future of business. And going back to partnership, if you have not built up in your supply chain strong partnership, so you know what you are doing, not just with your tier ones, but beyond tier ones to tier twos and tier threes, the complete supply chain, then it's going to be very complicated. And that goes back also to technology, because if you don't bring innovation and technology, so you have traceability of what you are doing, then it's going to become very complex. I'm sure Gareth has the same problem we have, being a global brand, we are targeted constantly by media, activists, you name it, whoever. When COVID-19, Q2 happened, the media started to challenge us as a brand. Did you cancel orders? Well, you have to make a proof of your statement in a very transparent manner. You cannot just say it, I did nothing. You have to prove and demonstrate you did nothing. So it goes back into this level of technology, innovation, partnership, inclusion, collaboration that you have to have built up downstream with your supply chain, but also upstream with your customers. So, COVID-19 has accelerated something that was actually kicked off many, many, many years ago. Remember Nike over 25 years ago when the sweatshop drama happened in Indonesia, that was the really beginning. Right now, if you're not there, being capable to provide this transparency in a fast manner, the way it can create the noise, damage the reputation of your brand, and not even talking about the regulators stopping your cargo to enter a country, that's going to become really pivotal in your business. So to me, it's not whether you want to be, it's how quick you can be transparent.
Good point. Very good point, Ann-Laure. And that was an interesting point that you raised about Black Friday and how companies, now there's a lot of pressure from the consumers and media. But of course, the interesting thing is if we look at Singles Day, $74.1 billion, 3.9 billion packages. Now, that is a lot of waste. So, how are we going to mitigate that? So I think that's a really good point. Now, there's a couple of questions that are coming in as well. I want to say thank you to Robert, and perhaps a question to you, Ben. Philippines has a wealth of smart engineers and IT skills, and English proficiency. What would it take for this country to fulfill its potential? Now, I can think of a couple of points, but as our top economist, Ben, what's your point of view?
Yes, it's a great question. So we've worked on a number of industrial park projects in the Philippines, and as part of that process, we've been out to companies to ask what would it take to get them to invest. So one of the challenges is that many of these engineers, they go into service-side occupations. So in fact, where the real opportunity may be is in remote servicing of equipment, particularly as we see the emergence of 5G, industrial IoT, and so forth. So there's competition there for this type of talent. The second obstacle is that it can be quite challenging to get the full range of permits you need to open up a new factory. It's quite a complex process. The bureaucracy there is quite a constraint. The third issue is one around labor productivity. So there's no doubt there is some fabulous top-tier talent. It's not always straightforward running a factory though there, particularly when you compare it to Vietnam. So then what would be the inflection point? Most likely when Vietnam fills up, and manufacturers are looking for other options, and then all of a sudden they're beginning to weigh up Indonesia and the Philippines, for instance, and there it starts to get more interesting. I must say though, there is always light at the end of the tunnel. I did speak with a very large global MNC just yesterday who made the choice of investing into either Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines. They did choose the Philippines at the end of the day. They had very specific reasons for that. The reasons may not be applicable to all companies, but for the most part, at least until now, most investment has gone into domestic manufacturing as opposed to export.
Okay, thank you, Ben, and thanks for the question, Robert. And also, I mean, obviously, infrastructure, that's a huge challenge, as we know. But Rcep is coming, so perhaps, hopefully, in the future, some of those permits and processes will get streamlined. We hope. Rainer, if you don't mind, perhaps I can also ask you another question in terms of the relationships that you have with your customers, with your clients. Is that getting easier, or is that getting more difficult right now? Because obviously with 2020, there's a lot of uncertainty. There are companies, quite frankly, that are, maybe they're not paying their bills, and maybe there's a lot of challenges across the supply chain.
Okay, thank you for your question. I will give you two answers. One answer is directly focusing on the problem right now, and I can say clearly customers are dissatisfied because we cannot deliver on time. We cannot deliver the right portion at the right moment of time. They are disappointed. And the more the logistics chain doesn't work, the more disappointed our customers are. So it is not the ideal world anymore of customer satisfaction, but dissatisfaction. On the other hand, there are major, since gloves are essential goods for the healthcare industry, there are major disruptors in many areas. They need urgently gloves. They need urgently PBE equipment and so forth. But we can't deliver because our factories are full for the next 500 days. And if you want to buy into a slot, a special slot, you need to auction and you pay much more. So I mean, that is not the right thing to properly maintain a good customer relationship. So what is the answer to the question, how to manage this in the future? I think we need to find the right technology as an enabler of a new business platform. What is it? In principle, we need to do a proper forecasting. Forecasting means not only looking into our own supply chain, manufacturing or ordering of material or production or kind of resources in the manufacturing plant and in the warehousing. That is, we have to go beyond it around the whole globe. As a global player, you need to start from the customer order, or even in the moment where the customer thinks about an order, until the moment the goods arrive at their doorstep. That's a very holistic, but it's a must-do kind of consideration. We cannot walk away from it. That means to be able or to enable an organization with a global footprint, you need to make use of artificial intelligence, or in better words, formerly it was called forecasting. Now it's being called predictive modeling of needs. So that is all available, but it's not in use yet. So that means the current modus operandi is to have order forms to talk to the customers and blah, 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 the old traditional way. In the future, we will know what a customer needs in advance before the customer knows what he wants, what he needs. So that means this kind of predictive modeling of intelligence in the market is mandatory. If you're going to know that, you got known of the whole platform intelligence, the whole workflow through the whole platform intelligence, you know exactly, there are no vessels available, blah, 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 and all this in advance. So we can make bookings in advance, we can do actions to work around all these problems. But nowadays we are on reactive mode. So that means the future is to put ourselves, by using predictive modeling and artificial intelligence, to put ourselves into active mode. Even in future crises, and this will not be the last one, we need to put ourselves into active mode on behalf of our customers, or not on behalf of our factories anymore. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think that's a very good point, in the fact that, as you mentioned, we are going to need these technologies. We are going to need to make use of those AI and predictive analytics tools in the future. Gareth, if you don't mind me asking you, what about at VF? Are you now using all of those, big data, AI, blockchain? That's another buzzword. What are you doing about all of these things?
So we're a little bit behind some other industries, I think, typically as an industry for apparel and footwear. VF, we're in the process of changing a number of our operating platforms to give us some of that better connectivity and better visibility to the data. We haven't traditionally been as connected digitally to our supply chain as we will be as we move forward. As I mentioned earlier on, we recognize that the huge amount of data that we needed to try and churn through with the beginning of the COVID impact, that's just not sustainable in Excel. We need to have much better ways and much faster ways of being able to analyze and model scenario plan data than we've got capably currently.
Thank you. Thanks, Gareth. Ann-Laure, how about you? Just on that technology front, do you now have a team a team of data scientists that are now driving all of this AI and predictive analytics?
Well, honestly, I'm sorry, I'm going to disagree with Rainer here, but I don't think in the apparel and footwear business you can predict anything, and predict something now with COVID-19 and all the destruction of data we went through. What can you predict on a t-shirt sales or a footwear sale based on the complete destruction that we have had from a consumer standpoint? And globally, when you look at it, you see a shift of consumers going from Europe now to China. You see that going also to India. I mean, it's very, very dynamic. I don't disagree that you need a very strong technology base to help you, to Gareth's points, to understand where your PORs and at what stage of production you are, and so you can map when you have to react on the prices. But on the demand side, I can tell you for a fact, I mean, for the past 6 months, if we would not have been reactive, being on the phone with people, buyers sitting 10,000 kilometers away, there's nothing that could have happened. So it's a combination to me, having a conversation between people and having the foundation, the technological foundation that helps you to make a decision, but not to replace your decision. And too often people think that technology will replace the decision, but I still believe, and that has been my experience for the past few months, that people still drive the car at the moment. Now, technology is important to make decisions. If we look, going back to what Gareth said earlier, digitalization of the supply chain has been critical on product development, because as people cannot travel, of course, you need designers to talk to product developer to talk to factory. So thank goodness we have digitalization today, so we can develop product much faster and much better. But again, it's a tool that helps to make a decision. It doesn't replace people to make the decision. And sometimes there is a confusion for me here that the system will take it over from us. Honestly, maybe in certain industry it can happen, but I don't see that. Maybe Gareth, you can echo or disagree with me, but I don't see that coming on footwear and apparel today.
Yeah, I see much the same, Ann-Laure. So I think machine learning and things will offer people scenarios to choose from or decisions to validate. We're not going to run on autopilot. Our industry is too far behind for that, certainly in my lifetime.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate that. Minesh, Ben, just a quick one. We've been hearing about the demise of manufacturing in China. We've been hearing about the demise of Hong Kong as a hub. Is it over? What's your feeling on all of this, Minesh? Are you going to stick around? Why did you set up in Hong Kong?
So Anson, it's like some of the data that you have presented and some of the information that we all know of. It's going to be a while before China can be replaced. For certain categories, yes, you can move certain productions to there, but not everything is possible. Especially when you look at products such as, so currently if you look at consumer electronics, everybody from Apple to Intel to everybody wants to move out of China, but they are limited to the China +1 policy. They won't be able to move it all completely. Similarly, for other product categories as well, it's not straightforward to just find economies of scale in those countries. It's not even about the cheaper labor. For certain industries, you're going to look at the facilities available, at the infrastructure available, and it's just not there. So for example, auto industry. The auto industry is not going to be that easy, or the aeronautics industry, it's not going to be that easy to move them to Thailand or Vietnam or India or any of these, just because of the lack of infrastructure and the lack of the type of engineers that you need for that, right? So there is a lot of limitations. As far as Hong Kong goes, for being in Hong Kong, the main reason is that the skill set, the sourcing skill set, and to what Gareth and Ann were saying, to the point where it is not that easy to have machine learning or AI replace people. The sourcing industry, sadly, the people who are able to help you do the sourcing or do it successfully only learn it from experience and having burned their hands in the market. You don't learn it in school, and you don't, software cannot solve the issues of sourcing and manufacturing. And that's why we are building a platform wherein you can have freelance sourcing professionals with expertise in particular product categories and particular regions that can help you do the sourcing. So I think Hong Kong would be the ideal place for a company like ours because of the skill set of the people that is available here.
Okay, fair enough. Ben,
Look,
Hong Kong, viability, are we sticking around or are we packing our bags and leaving?
Hong Kong is still very viable, but the nature of what we do may change. So we're very viable for two reasons. One is the Greater Bay Area's advanced machinery, ICT industries are well placed to grow in the coming years. At the same time as we see, relocation of production at the margin move into Southeast Asia, Hong Kong is geographically well positioned to service that. So there's certainly the market there for us to service, but the way that we service it might change, and we might become more value added. We might service a more sort of internationally focused part of the business. We might service more of the sort of the digitization aspects of the supply chain. But I think the reasons to be here are still quite compelling. A lot of that depends on tax rates, of course, and whether our competing cities or collaborating cities in the Greater Bay Area start to offer competitive tax rates, which is a question I'd throw back to you. That might change that story somewhat.
Good point, Ben, and no doubt if people want to know the answer to that, they'll be reading our KPMG tax alerts in the future. Thank you, Ben. Rainer, if you don't mind me asking you, 2020, it's been a tough year for a lot of people. Let's look ahead. Let's look at 2021. What are you hoping for? What's think about your wish list. What's on your wish list? Am I right in thinking that AI predictive analytics, that's on your wish list? What else? More containers on your wish list?
Actually, thank you very much for the question. My wish list is quite long because we have learned a lot of things during COVID-19, especially not to forget the fourth industrial revolution. So I continue to look into that since 2011, once the industrial revolution number 4 got started. As I said before, not many people realize it, but it got started by the introduction of Industry 4.0. And being a person in the manufacturing ecosystem globally, and I had during my Siemens days about factories in about 18 countries in the world, doing business in 67 countries by myself. So I really think about borderless, and the internet is not borderless, so we have to think and act borderless. The borderless consideration is setting a new mindset. And that means the supply chain has to be not produced or designed from the manufacturer viewpoint, but from the end customer viewpoint, the other way around. So that my wish list number 1 is take charge on the ongoing revolutions and take advantage of it by using digitized technologies as an enabler. So the business model of the future will remain digitalization from A to Z, from end to end, customer order to customer delivery at the doorstep is a ring function, is a loop function. So that will remain. But the technologies will change every single day. That means that we have to keep an eye on the best enabling technologies all the time and manufacture a model which is customer centricity, which is called customer experience based. So that is what I wish to do. And the main wish is actually on top of all that people responsible in these areas of business and functionalities in economies or leading companies or being in Fortune 500 and so, they have to change their mindset in accordance. So I think KPMG shall look into the mindset change as well, because that is a key functionality of the future, to churn from now into the future.
Very good point, Rainer. Excellent points. As you said, we've got to think and act borderless. We've also got to have this new mindset, and we've got to think about the angle from a customer point of view, that customer centricity. Thank you for sharing. Gareth, Ann-Laure, we're running out of time. I've just been given a 5-minute warning, so we are going to finish up very soon. But people are really, really important, as we know. How are we going to upskill and reskill our people, Gareth?
I think one of the things that's really been evident through COVID, and I think is going to continue, Anson, is just the empowerment all the way up and down our supply chain. Ann-Laure mentioned earlier on, for a long time in our industry, we've had designers or developers coming from the brands to Asia because that's the only way we can operate now. We do all of that remotely by Zoom and other electronic means. And so that empowerment cascading down through the supply chain, I think, is going to be really good for the growth and development of talent within the supply chains. We also have to recognize, whilst we're always going to need technical skills and capabilities, none of us have ever seen anything like COVID before in our working lives. And so, problem solving, decision making is much more important now than sort of legacy knowledge and information. And so having critical thinking, having people with really high learning agility is really important. One of the things that we've started to do at VF is, when we're either hiring or looking to advance people within their careers, is to actually use a learning agility assessment and to really understand how they're likely to perform in the future. So I think that those are the couple of things that come to mind for me.
Thank you, Gareth. And Ann-Laure, how are we going to How are we going to manage our people in the future? How are we going to upskill and reskill? What are you doing?
Gareth said a lot of good stuff, and Reinhard as well. I think mindset is central. If you don't have the mindset, you can ask everything. It's never going to work. So mindset is really the center of everything. We moved product development at Puma in Asia about 7 years ago. So everything is located. Our product developers are sitting in the factory. They work with the suppliers, which help us to get the knowledge. I mean, I keep saying very often that people forget that you need a supplier to have a product. If you don't have a supplier, you have zero product. And empowering also your supply chain and all the partners of the supply chains to collaborate and collectively make decisions based on the right set of data is important. So to me and to Puma is really very focused on mindset. A lot of people are not pleased to be in the driving seat. They love to be at the back of the bus and just watching, the sceneries. Very few people love to drive. And it's finding these people who have the passion and the will and the desire to learn and grow and drive. And just one last topic on Hong Kong, on sourcing. Hong Kong has a very strong pool of talent for our industry, which is critical. And we use a lot of this Hong Kong talent to send them in Vietnam, in Germany, in China, in different locations to also train locally and bring that culture and that mindset, because it's really all the mindset. If you have the will to learn, if they have the will to take ownership, then, sky is the limit. But a lot of people, I can tell you, are very happy to be sitting at the back of the bus and look at the scenery. So it's finding the right people.
Finding the right people with the right passion, as you said, Ann-Laure. If I'm not mistaken, key message there is collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. And as you said,
Trust.
and Gareth, mindset is central.
And trust people around you. Really
trust people. Trust people around you. Ladies and gentlemen, we are really out of time, but final points. I love my buzzwords. So for all of those senior executives that are, of course, going to listen to this amazing PBEC webinar on the future of supply chains part 2, what's the message, Gareth? What message would you like to share with all of those senior executives today?
Yeah, so my keyword, Anson, is empowerment. I think that's the way forward. It's going to change how we work with many of our partners and actually then foster much closer collaboration up and down the supply chain.
Very good. Ann-Laure, how about what's your message to all of those senior execs? What do they have to do?
Well, apart from smiling, as I keep saying all the time,
smile, that's good.
But the second one is try to stay positive, because there are good days and bad days, and what Gareth says is so true. It's empowering, collaborating, bringing trust. It's all about people. Yes, we need technology. Yes, we need data, but we need people. And I think people on COVID-19, is center of a lot of things.
Good point. We need people. And obviously, as you said, we need to try and stay positive. Thanks, Ann-Laure. Rainer, what about your message to all of those senior executives? What do they need to do?
There are two major messages. One is abolish the hierarchical structures and replace them by agility management, and let the young people make decisions on their own. Number two is change your mind in terms of fully integration and integrate industry and integrate supply chain 4.0 into a famous tailor-made industry 4.0 platform. So the future is agility management and platform industry.
Very good. Thank you very much. Great points. Minesh.
From my point of view, I think the only thing that I think is going to be constant in the future is change, and how quickly you adapt to change and how quickly you pivot and respond to it is going to determine the success of companies.
Yeah, how quickly can you adapt? Ben?
My only word would be transparency, and using data analytics, digitization to provide that transparency. But as Ann-Laure mentioned, ultimately it's just a tool for decision makers, right?
Very good. So transparency, keep it simple. Very good. And if people were to ask me, I'd say we all need to innovate or die. profound, I know, but I just want to say a big thank you to everybody joining me. This has been an incredibly easy job for me when you've got people like Gareth and Rainer and Ann-Laure and Minesh, and of course you, Ben. But I really do want to say a big thank you to all of you for spending your valuable time with us this morning. It's been great learning, really great insights for everybody. And on that note, please have a great week ahead. Please stay safe and well. And Mike, I think that's a wrap.
Well, thank you, Anson. And I just want to echo your thanks to all your fellow panelists. It's been a wonderful session. I've been listening intensely, and I think it's a record for me, 7 pages of notes, which I'm going to have to write up at some point for the PBEC blog. So once again, thank you. It's been amazing. Some really great points, I have to say, just echoing. And it's really up to date in theme with what we're hearing as well. So, you know, there's consensus being formed, and that's what PBEC does, is build consensus. And we want to share a lot of this with the policymakers in due course. So once again, thanks for everybody who could join this morning, and thanks for those who are listening on the recorded version. So stop recording now. Thank you.